So I know a lot of you guys are recording with some not so great equipment. I know that you're recording in some not ideal spaces, but that doesn't mean that you can't still get a good recording. So I'm going to give you a few tips that'll help you get a lot better recordings, even if you're working in a less than ideal situation. The first one seems really straightforward, which is why so many people overlook it, but you need to have your instruments set up well, tuned properly. Like, I cannot stress enough how important this step is. This is especially important for drums and acoustic guitar because with an acoustic instrument, obviously the way the instrument itself sounds in the room is going to be what affects the way it's recorded the most. But this is also important for things like electric guitar and electric bass and synths and things like that. If you get the instrument itself sounding as good as it possibly can, it's going to make the recording of it a lot simpler. It's going to mean tuning your drums well. It may very well mean new drum heads. It's going to mean new strings on your guitars, making sure your guitars are intonated properly. Seriously, guys, if you just get your instruments set up really well, if they're sounding really, really good from the start, then everything after that is so much easier. The next thing is going to be mic positioning. Getting your mic positioning right can really make a massive difference in the tones that you record. This is going to be really important for drums. You want to utilize the polar pattern of your microphone. When you're miking the top of the snare, or the toms, or even the underside of the snare, you want to use the polar pattern to reject all the other stuff. Most of the mics you're going to be using have a cardioid polar pattern, meaning they pick up sound from the front, but they reject the sound that's directly behind them. So when you're putting a mic on top of the snare drum, you want to point the back of the microphone towards the hi-hat. Obviously, the front still needs to be pointing towards the snare to hear the snare, but you need to get it in a position that the front's pointing at the snare and the back is pointing at the hi-hat, so that it's rejecting as much of that hi-hat bleed as possible. Same thing with the toms. You want the back of the tom mics to be pointing towards the cymbals that are above it, so you can reject as much of the cymbal bleed into the tom mics as you can. And with the snare bottom mic, you want to try to position it so that the back of the bottom mic is pointed towards the kick, so it's rejecting as much of the kick sound as possible. Even just that, even just setting up your mic so it's rejecting a lot of bleed is going to make a massive difference in your drum sounds. Now, mic positioning is also going to be important for guitars, especially electric guitars. You want to make sure that that mic is positioned in a good spot on the cabinet, because really, if you have the mic in the dead center of the speaker, it's going to be really bright. It can even be harsh if you're doing distorted guitar, and it's going to get slowly darker as you move towards the edge of the speaker. Mic positioning is so important because what that mic is hearing is the sound that's going to be translated onto the recording. If you get that right at the beginning, the source tones are going to be a lot better, and that's going to make your life way easier down the line. And the last thing is to put up any kind of acoustic treatment you possibly can. If you're recording in a basement or in an untreated bedroom, the sound of that room is going to get into the microphones and it's going to make everything sound like trash. This is really important for drums because of the slap back you're going to get into the close drum mics. It can really ruin your drum sound with phase problems. And with vocals, especially with how out front vocals are, you don't want to hear the sound of the room in the vocal mic. You just want to hear the vocal. You need to get the cleanest recording you possibly can. So that means putting up some kind of treatment. You're usually looking for absorption first. You want to deaden the room as much as you can if you're in a not great space. And if you can't afford, actual acoustic treatment, even just put up some blankets around the vocalist. Just something to reduce the sound of the room in the microphones. You'd be amazed how much of a difference in the quality of your recording just a little bit of treatment can make. So there you go, guys. Those are my 3 biggest tips for getting good recordings in a less than ideal situation. Make sure all your instruments are set up right and tuned well. Make sure you get the mic positioning right and use the polar pattern of the mic to your advantage, and put up some kind of treatment, anything, even if it's just blankets, to deaden the sound of the room in the microphones, especially when recording vocals.